think I'll join the crowd and put my picture up here for this time.
I see you up there. Hi, Mary.
Hello, Melissa. Hi, John.
Hello, Mary.
Jessica, Tiana.
Yep.
Is the screen still showing? The screen share still showing? Okay. Well, we're really glad you guys can join.
Well, thanks for making this happen.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great. It's great to have your undivided attention, I guess, to think about this. Yeah, and then John, and if Jim Clifford joins us, they're gonna have to jump off of this right into another meeting. So is Jessica.
Yes, Stony Park area plan. There's a lot of good reasons why that one is really should be video, should be a Zoom one.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Well,
actually, it might be better. I don't know.
I will have to say that the open house, I think, went along extremely well, even though it took 2 deputies there.
Oh, really?
Well,
Well, things are a little
Mary,
spunky out there in Donny Park, huh?
yes, the rest of the story will come out eventually, but I'm not going to say a whole lot about it until
Oh,
I'll have plenty to say when it comes to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
okay. Okay. Oh my
Keeping them-
gosh.
Keeping them waiting.
Yeah, well, all I can say is anyone who's been watching the news and seeing what is going on with school boards would not be surprised with this. So it is just an unfortunate aspect of what's going on in the country right now.
Yeah.
And
It's too
as a
bad.
comment relative to that, I've got to say that I think we have a remarkably civil process with our Planning and Zoning Commission.
So there's Don, Tammy, and Sot have joined us.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi,
Oh,
Don.
How's everybody
Hi,
doing?
everyone.
Hi, Tammy.
Hello, Mary. How are you?
Excellent.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
I'm psyched to have a little snow. Been skiing some at the Nordic Center on a few inches.
How was it out there?
Oh,
Actually,
yeah,
yesterday
how is it?
it was, you know, we can't be that picky. So it was actually better yesterday than I thought. And we went out and took the dogs, did the dog loop, and you know,
Nice.
expectations weren't that high and they were exceeded. So
Gotcha.
yeah, it was nice, just nice being out.
Yeah, it's great to have some precip, although that big storm seems like it just got blown right over us.
Yeah,
we
we
need more.
had quite a bit of time with no electricity out here. Fortunately, I have a generator, so as soon as things went out, it cranked up. But as soon as we found out that APS was getting things well in hand, then the internet went out for another 4 or 5 hours.
Oh, God.
Just all part of living in northern Arizona.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's nice to actually have a little bit of wetness, and the rain was great. We got a bit of rain.
Yeah, what it left us with was a tremendous amount of ice on everything under the snow. The 1 inch of snow we got out here on the east side of things.
I was gonna say I had to chip some ice away off my car to get into it.
Well, having grown up in New Jersey, that's normal winter fare. So,
Yeah, I thought garages were made to prevent that, but
yeah, well, we didn't have, anyway.
I guess I should refer
Old
to,
house with one little tiny garage. It wasn't. made
Yeah.
to fit.
I guess they're really storage bays anymore.
You got it.
Just
So
full
it's 2
stuff.
o'clock. Did you want to get started? All right, so Tammy, I don't know. I don't know that we need to formally kick the meeting off, but would you like to just do introductions, or how would you want to do this?
Okay, you know what? I hadn't really thought about it. I'm looking at the agenda now, Melissa. What I had thought we would do, I was really hoping that you guys would give us a presentation. I can tell you that I've got the written draft in front of me, and I have read the whole thing. And the purpose would be, it's kind of going back to what you and I, Jessica and Sada talked about when we met, that we've got some pretty big scale energy projects coming our way. And they're probably going to hit us prior to this ordinance being in place. And so I know that SOT was very concerned that the commission be very much informed and ready to process these as they come in, even without this ordinance being in place. SOT, did I speak correctly on that?
Very much so. And I when we get into the meeting, I'd like to say a few words on deep background. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, actually it does, Son. And I think, I actually think, Melissa, going to your intro, that really is, welcome everyone. I am really, really pleased with this turnout. I believe that all of us, do you see anyone on there, Melissa, that you would like to have formally introduced?
I think we should go around real quickly. There are a couple of staff people that maybe you haven't been introduced to. So let's just do that quickly. Would that be okay?
Okay. Do you want to start now? I'm looking at the list of participants. I don't know what order you guys are seeing them in, but I will just go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Tammy Ontiveros, and I am the chair of the Coconino County Planning and Zoning Commission.
And I'm Don Walters, and I'm the vice chair of planning and zoning. Been a native of Northern Arizona, as is Tammy.
Mhm.
I'm Sot Best. I'm planning and zoning commissioner from District 1.
John Ruggles, Planning and Zoning Commissioner, District 2. And one thing I'll add that although I am not a native Arizonan, it's getting pretty close. I've been here about 51 years now.
And I'll add that John and I are on the committee putting together the renewable energy ordinance.
Thank you, Sot.
Been
Appreciate it.
working for, has it been a year? It's been a long time.
It's been a while. Yep.
Yes, yeah. I'll have a little bit to say about that in the discussion part of this also, as well as Sot will.
Mary?
I'm Mary Williams. I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission, also District 1.
And Tiana?
I'm Tiana Burton, and I'm on the P&Z Commission for District 3.
Great. Well, thank you, commissioners. Just real quick, let's go around staff then. Bob Short,
Bob Short, Principal Planner here at the county.
Kelly,
Good afternoon. I'm Kelly. I'm a planner here at the county.
Jessica,
Hi, everyone. Jessica Simmons, Urban Wildlife Planner for the county.
and Marty.
Marty Hernandez, the admin specialist for community development.
And Aaron.
Aaron Munkin here at the Coconino County Attorney's Office. Just providing legal counsel and support for community development and the Planning and Zoning Commission. And also by way of another introduction, here in the retreat today, we have another one of our attorneys, Paul Garnes, who has recently made the jump from the criminal side of our office into the civil, and he'll be sharing responsibilities with me and advising community development and planning and zoning. So this is first introduction into the business that we all carry out here.
Thank you. Nice, welcome, Paul. Nice to have you join us.
Hi, I'm Paul. Good to be here.
Great, thank you. And then we had Matt Storish.
Howdy, y'all. Matt Storish, hydrologist with Community Development. Thanks for having me on today.
Thanks for joining. So Tammy, did you have anything else, or should we just jump right in?
I think we should just jump right in. And I think a really good segue that Saad already started was, let's give a little bit of background so we all know why we're here and where we're headed. I think that would be really good to bring right up at the front of the meeting.
Okay, would you like me to start real quick?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, first of all, thank you to all of you commissioners who were able to, join us this afternoon. We were hoping that we could get some of your undivided attention and time to focus on what we've drafted so far, the utility scale renewable energy ordinance. And as Sat mentioned, we've been working with an advisory group for over a year to put this together. And, we've had a lot of really good input, actually excellent input from the advisory group. And we'll talk a little bit more about who is part of that. But the purpose really today is to, as I mentioned, do a deep dive into the details of the ordinance and to get your thoughts, comments, perceptions for going forward. So I won't take a lot of time to talk about that. I will let you know that on the next slide, we have a presentation that we actually pre-recorded, and it's about 30 minutes. So I just wanted to give you a heads up, but that does try to get deep into the details of the code. So hopefully that will answer a lot of questions, and they'll leave us a good hour plus to talk about and just have open discussion. So that's all I had for now, but then we can get into the presentation after, if Sat wanted to say something, and if you wanted to move ahead after that.
Okay, yeah, I do. So Melissa, are you thinking Saad and then the prepared introduction or presentation, excuse me, what order?
I think it's fine if Sat wants to give some background now, or Sat, you haven't seen the presentation. Maybe we should watch the presentation and then just get into the details. Does that sound okay? Or would you prefer to say something now?
I'm fine waiting.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, let's go ahead and start the presentation then.
So it's actually on YouTube. So hold on, let's make the connection here.
Okay.
And I may have to reshare screen. Let's see. Is YouTube showing or not?
But what I've got is.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for a look at COVID.
I have to.
We're hearing something.
Yep. Let me reshare. Hold on.
County's utility scale renewable energy ordinance.
Are you seeing this?
Yeah, we sure are. I think we're good to go.
All right, thanks.
Commonly referred to as the Rio. We hope to provide an in-depth view into
Melissa, I lost the audio.
As did I.
Okay, maybe it's since I muted myself. Let's try this.
Scale renewable energy ordinance.
Okay, that's good.
The county anticipated the need for this ordinance and established an action item, goals, and policies based on the values outlined in the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan contains a detailed energy element and an appendix that set the foundation for this work. The first large-scale utility scale project was Perrin Wind Farm, built over 10 years ago. Through that process and two recent additional utility scale wind projects, county planning staff and the Planning and Zoning Commission have learned about what landscape scale projects mean in terms of impacts to the landscape and how to apply the values expressed in the comprehensive plan to these projects. Other drivers for this project include the potential for solar and wind energy within Coconino County, the increased demand for renewables, supporting forest restoration and public safety. Projects provide a means to keep large landscapes and branches intact, meaning that they provide financial security for landowners to keep their large areas in one piece. Project applications are also increasing, partly due to the APS decarbonization plan and closure of the Navajo generating station. What types of facilities will the ordinance address? The ordinance will become part of the county zoning ordinance and is specific to 3 types of renewable projects: solar, wind, and biomass. These applications will be processed as conditional use permits, which require a public hearing with the Planning and Zoning Commission. We'll talk about that in detail later. As we mentioned, the county has learned about potential project impacts, and these may include impacts due to audible noise from wind turbines, impacts to archaeological, cultural, and historic resources, emissions due to biomass plants, and impacts on air quality, lighting from aviation warning lights, shadow flicker from wind turbines, vegetation and weed impacts due to grading and ground disturbance, visual impacts to visual resource, so including undergrounding the lines, water impacts, and impacts to wildlife. So how have we drafted this ordinance? In addition to direction from the comprehensive plan, county planning staff has been working with an advisory group who have offered their time, expertise, and voice to the drafting process. Since July 2020, we've worked with technical experts, industry representatives, partner agencies, the environmental community, planning commissioners, former county supervisors, and county citizens in understanding varying aspects and impacts of these projects, what is important to regulate, and how to do that in an atmosphere of creative and active discussion. We've also researched best practices and studied ordinances from around the country. This work has been continuous and is ongoing. Throughout the drafting process, the advisory group has reviewed the ordinance details and discussed specific issues that are important to highlight. And these include wind turbine setbacks, disturbance and impacts to vegetation, including the concept of agrovoltaics, how to minimize grading impacts, how to minimize weed proliferation, what are the fencing standards, what are impacts to wildlife and how to address those, how to address visual impacts, how to address cultural impacts, and also the idea of cumulative impacts and what that means. We will show later how each of these are proposed to be addressed in the ordinance. To provide context, we'll review how these facilities are proposed to be defined in the ordinance. And this will establish some of the baseline for the discussion going forward. So first of all, note that the county zoning ordinance currently contains a land use called utility facility, and renewable projects have been and will continue to be permitted as this type of land use. Utility facilities are allowed in all zoning districts with a conditional use permit, so there will be no change to land uses in the zoning ordinance. We propose amending this definition to include utility scale renewable energy systems, and with that to define the specific types of renewable energy systems. So you'll see here in the purple text, the existing utility facility definition updated with the umbrella heading or umbrella definition for utility scale renewable energy system. And here's that definition for this umbrella definition, that a utility scale renewable energy system is a commercial solar energy, wind energy, or biomass energy installation that produces electric power and transmits it through a substation to supply energy to the large scale utility grid for off-site uses. And the appurtenances such as equipment structures, meteorological towers, and energy storage equipment are included with that. So more specifically, wind energy installation is a commercial facility that produces electricity and consists of one or more wind turbines or other devices such as substations, met towers, cables, and wires for the primary purpose of wholesale sales of generated electricity. And that's the key. These facilities are providing wholesale energy for off-site uses. Solar energy installations are commercial facilities that convert sunlight into electricity, whether by photovoltaics or other conversion technology for the primary purpose of wholesale sales. Please note that concentrating solar thermal devices or CSV are not permitted with this definition. Those are the facilities that use mirrors, and that has been determined not to be appropriate in Coconino County. And finally, biomass energy installation is a commercial facility that converts organic matter, known as biomass or feedstock, into electricity, heat, or transportation fuels such as biofuels. A biomass energy installation would also include the furnace or combustion device and storage of biomass on site. So now we'll talk about some of the specifics of the ordinance. Now that we provided the context for the type of facilities, the details are shown here in terms of the structure of the ordinance. The ordinance will amend 3 sections of the zoning ordinance. Chapter 3 has the specific standards, performance standards, and details for each type of system. Chapter 5 are the administrative section, and that includes waivers that the commission has authority to waive some of the standards in chapter 3, and then chapter 6 will be amended, and that includes the new definitions. This slide shows the new sections that would be added to chapter 3, which includes a purpose statement, applicability statement, preferred and disfavored location criteria, preliminary site investigations, performance standards, and then permits and administration. So let's start with the purpose statement. This was based on the comprehensive plan's goals and policies, and in particular, the energy element and the appendix, as well as input from the advisory group. So you can see there are several components to the purpose statement, including one of the main goals is to give county residents, leaders, staff, and developers a clear direction on the appropriate siting of utility scale renewable energy projects while considering unique permitting conditions for each site and type of utility. And to also provide and promote reliable clean energy sources by providing clear standards that encourage utility scale renewable energy systems to preserve the county's intact natural landscapes and private lands from fragmentation, offer private landholders options for economic diversity and stability, to mitigate climate change impacts, and to protect and maintain wildlife populations and corridors, viewsheds, vegetative communities, protect our dark skies, air quality, and natural quiet. And also there's a portion of the statement where we would look to projects to support and provide benefits to the county, such as revenue generation, job creating, economic and environmental benefits. Those are the locally achieved benefits to these projects. So skipping to the preferred and disfavored criteria section, note that this is modeled after the zoning ordinance's existing wireless communication ordinance. The criteria are not performance standards. Rather, these are intended to guide the applicant and decision makers as to the preferred siting of facilities. The section regarding preliminary site investigation is intended to require preliminary investigations or information that are provided early in the process to give the applicant, the county, and decision makers information very early about important resources that may be impacted by these projects, and to find ways to design the site and to mitigate the impacts. So one of the unique features of this ordinance is that we are asking for what are called desktop surveys of information that is available to help us understand the habitat and wildlife within each project area, the vegetation, and including any existing noxious weeds, archaeological, cultural, and historic resources that may be present, what visual resources may be near the site that require simulations and consideration, what water resources are nearby. We're also asking to see an early lighting plan to make sure that it complies with our lighting ordinance. For biomass facilities in particular, we're looking for an emissions analysis of the particular particulates, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And in addition, we would be asking for a description of the current and traditional land uses so we understand how that fits into the purpose statement. In terms of performance standards, we have some specific standards that we'll talk about, including sensitive area avoidance, vegetation, weed and landscaping, wildlife management, stormwater management, fencing, audible noise limits, setbacks, height and standards between zones, visual impact, signs, roads and access. So we'll discuss several of these performance standards in detail. First, the purpose of the performance standard regarding sensitive area avoidance relates to preliminary site investigations. And this is where we'll take that information and look for a site plan that is designed to avoid these sensitive areas and reduce the likelihood of significant adverse impacts. So we'd be looking for a sensitive area map that would identify these areas and features such as archaeological, cultural, historic sites, heritage areas, cultural landscapes, visual resources, plant and wildlife resources, and habitats. We can use this information to help design the site and ask for additional siting adjustments that may be required as a condition of the permit. Along with the discussion about how to protect native vegetation and minimize weeds, we also have some additional discussion that we want to bring to your attention regarding agrovoltaics. So the purpose of this section is to make sure that we are maintaining as much native vegetative cover and topsoil as we can during the construction process. And then after that, this slide shows on the left what we are hoping to achieve. And that is a project area that is vegetated with native plants versus the image on the left, which shows a site that has been obviously completely cleared of vegetation and topsoil. The link at the bottom shows that there's some research going on into Agro Voltaics, which is simply a combination of renewable energy plus agriculture. It works in some areas where there's intensive management and water, but there is some promising studies showing that there's a cooling effect of the panels, and that combined with some of the planting underneath the panels has a beneficial effect of both cooling the soil, maintaining native topsoil, as well as it can actually cool the panels and enhance their productivity. Whether or not that can be applied in Coconino County is still not known due to our different climate and water restrictions, but it's something worth considering.
There have already been efforts in Coconino County by many different groups to identify important habitat for wildlife that should be protected. It's habitat that's necessary between different habitat areas so that animals can travel in between these areas seasonally, which are necessary to find food and mates. The RIO will take advantage of this work that's already been done so that if a utility facility is proposed where these wildlife linkage areas have been identified, we can take a deep look at that, and that habitat can be protected, and we can maintain the passage for the animals that use it. These wildlife linkages have been mapped using GIS, and they're viewable online on a publicly available website, and we've put the link here. An idea we've had in order to minimize the amount of habitat that is made unavailable by fencing is to have a gap underneath the fence. This would mainly apply to solar developments where they need to put a fence around the solar panels to protect them. If we put a 6-inch gap along the bottom of the fence, that would allow medium-sized animals to access the area inside the fencing. In order to help you picture that, here's a photo of a kit fox in California passing underneath this gap in the fence. That's a small kind of fox. This fencing would be required of developers to minimize the amount of habitat that would be lost.
Another performance standard to think about is audible noise. We do understand that wind turbines create a certain amount of noise, and so a standard has been written into the draft that decibels at the property line would not exceed 50 decibels, measured by a qualified expert and demonstrated by a noise analysis. This decibel limit is consistent with noise limits used for conditional use projects throughout the county, such as for the indoor shooting range approved several years ago and generators related to campground projects. Another performance standard is in relation to visual impact, and some of the The standards required in the code would ask that all collection lines within the installation be undergrounded. We are asking that visual impacts be mitigated from transmission lines connecting to substations to the greatest extent practical. We are also going to be looking at these wind energy installations be designed to minimize as much of the adverse visual impacts as possible. That would include possibly resiting some of the turbines based on impacts to known visual resources. We would also be making sure that the facilities comply with our lighting section, our dark sky lighting section of the zoning ordinance. And then additionally, that projects use FAA approved radar activated systems. We're fortunate now that these are standard fare for these projects, and so that the aviation warning lights will be radar activated on these projects. And please note that the number of that visual simulations will be required as part of the application submittal. This is also related to what we have come up with and are proposing with the draft as far as a visual resource definition. So this was something important to understand, that there are certain defined visual resources, such as scenic byways, scenic corridors, scenic roads, historic roads, etc., that the county knows about, that are already identified, and that we can request applicants to simulate visual impact from, and that we would be specifically looking to protect from visual impacts. The image on the right is an image of Highway 180, which is known as a scenic corridor. And then we'd like to talk a bit about what will be required with the permits and administration section. So we have specific application requirements that are detailed just for these types of utility facilities. And that would include having a detailed written narrative that talks about the current best practices, the technology being used, and the anticipated impacts, as well as other details. We will be seeing architectural drawings. Again, we would be seeing that visual impact analysis to include the visual simulations. We would have a traffic impact study or analysis. We would have a cultural resources management plan that would detail how any cultural resources or historic resources would be managed throughout the life of the project, including construction. And then also we would have a public safety, fire protection, and emergency management plan. In addition, there'll be a wildlife protection plan, erosion control, and noxious weed control plans. We'll be taking a look at compliance information and lease agreements, and then also the idea of participating or non-participating property owner confirmation. This is another concept to think about. Energy developers often work with neighboring property owners to bring them into the project area. Although they may not have actual facilities on their site, they are participating in the project and receiving some sort of benefit from the developer as being a participating property owner. So you'll see that throughout the ordinance, we make a distinction between participating property owner and non-participating property owner. Also important to note that we are requesting decommissioning plan and securities. Once a project is not operating for 2 years, then they would have to remove all of the equipment and grind down to a depth of 3 feet any of the foundations that have been poured for the turbines and the installations. We would also be asking the applicant to identify any modifications to the standards or the waivers that they would be asking for the commission to consider. There's also the option for the county to contract with a third party to help review large projects and also to provide technical expertise. And then finally, the monitoring plans and compliance reporting are important aspects to consider, and we'll talk about that in some detail next.
A wildlife protection plan would also be required, which would be based on the results of the preliminary site evaluations. This would detail how direct and cumulative impacts to wildlife, and then what's important for wind utility facilities. We'd look at impacts to birds and bats especially, and then also the wildlife linkages. And this report would show how impacts to all these important resources would be avoided through project design, and then evaluation, monitoring, and mitigation strategies. Another really important aspect to look at for these projects is not just look at the impacts from one single project on the landscape, but look at all the other projects that are present and potentially foreseeable in the future, all the impacts together that all of these projects would have on different resources such as wildlife and migration corridors.
Talk more about the application requirements, modifications to the operations have been considered, and we wanted to provide some background as to what was written into the ordinance. So the compliance, monitoring, and reporting is an important part of the permitting. And so the monitoring plan and compliance reporting is currently required, proposed to be required yearly or per the specific permit conditions. We would also have drafted into the ordinance that if there are any impacts identified by the monitoring plans and the compliance reporting, that they would be looked at on a case-by-case basis, but that modifications to facility operations not exceed more than 1/20th of 1% of total annual operational hours. And this was identified based on information we have from the Perrin Wind Farm, avian and bat protection plan. And so there was some basis for coming up with that number based on information provided from that plan. And then finally, some offsite mitigation of like kind would be potentially required if there were some impacts that needed to be mitigated elsewhere. So now we'll talk a little bit more about some of the utility specific standards. So there are some general performance standards applied to all of these projects. And this would include that projects be designed to limit perching by birds for wind and met towers, that there be bird diverters on guy wires. Above ground power lines would need to comply with the avian power line standards. In addition, there are performance standards related to safety and shadow flicker nuisance. Shadow flicker is a term that's also a new definition based on these projects, and that has created a strobe-like effect when the sun is passing through turning blades. And so you'll see there that the shadow flicker nuisance be limited to no more than 30 hours per year to non-participating property owners. And also that the blade sweep be a minimum of 30 feet to the ground. That's another safety issue. As we discussed briefly before, there are some air quality impacts for biomass plants. And so we would ask to see the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality permit in terms of how any air quality impacts would be addressed with biomass plants. Specifically about wind turbine setbacks, currently the proposal is that the setbacks be 3 times the height of the tower or at least a half mile from the property line of any non-participating residential or open space zone property, a 1/4 mile from other zones or state lands. Recall that setbacks are waiverable, that is, they can be customized by a planning and zoning commission based on the project. And in order to understand these impacts, then this is where the visual impact analysis and simulation is very important to take a look at. This image shows some different perspectives on wind turbine setbacks. The image on the far right showing this smaller wind turbine is actually a 1 mile distance from a non-participating property owner, a 1 mile setback of a 300-foot tall wind turbine, which is based on the Perrin Wind Farm application and permitting requirements, conditions of permit of approval. The image in the middle, the turbine is of an 880-foot wind turbine at a 1/2 mile distance from a non-participating property owner. This is drawn to show you the difference between setbacks, distance, and as well as the impacts based on the varying heights of turbines. Specific to solar installations, again, these are permitted as a utility facility conditional use permit. The size of the system, that is the generating energy being generated by the system, is not differentiated as it is in some jurisdictions. And these installations must meet the height and setbacks of the zoning ordinance. But again, modifications are allowed by the planning commissions to provide customized standards for each project. Regarding biomass energy, we have learned that it's likely that the minimum site required would be about 20 acres. Noise will be an issue because the operations are continuous. They operate 24 hours a day. Another issue to think about for biomass will be the storage, on-site storage of materials, which may include material piles of 30 to 40 feet high. That image on the right is of a biomass plant, and then the link below is a fly-through of the same facility. And so there are specific standards for these biomass plants. They must meet the height and setbacks of the zoning district. And again, talking about emissions analysis, that an emissions analysis in consultation with the Naval Observatory for biomass plants would be required. And that would identify the project locations, the technologies that will be used, and the potential emissions and particulates. And this is important again to our observatories when they're trying to maintain their clear, dark skies to conduct their research. We've talked a lot about visual resource impacts. The image on the right is a visual simulation of the recently approved Babbitt Ranch Energy Center. And the draft currently contains requiring visual resources for any visual resource that's within 10 miles of a project site. We've learned that after 10 miles, it's more difficult to see, particularly large wind turbines, but it's still the visual impact analysis can be customized to really understand the impacts from any identified visual resources. And then we have performance standards that we will apply to mitigate the impacts as much as possible. So some other details, we've identified some projects that are related to this ordinance writing, but actually have broader application. And one of those is that when we were looking into how to address visual impacts of wind turbines, we've identified the need for a countywide visual resource inventory, which could be useful for a number of types of projects. We also have an understanding of cumulative impacts, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. And then finally, we're also seeking better ways to communicate with all groups, and due to the large scale of these projects, want to connect specifically with tribal governments. To talk a bit about visual resource inventory, we do have some known visual resources, as has been mentioned, and we have started to map those, as you can see. We do know which are our existing road corridors, for instance, and so we're working to identify impacts to those types of resources with these projects. Cumulative impact we've already discussed a bit, and it was important enough to the county when the existing comprehensive plan was approved in 2015 that it was actually a comprehensive plan action item to look at cumulative impacts related to wildlife concerns. And the Planning and Zoning Commission has also been thinking about this. And so the draft ordinance contains a definition and requirements for how to do cumulative impact analysis specific to wildlife concerns at this time. So this slide shows what we've drafted to encourage additional communication and outreach to Native American tribes. We've worked with the Nature Conservancy, and they have actually suggested that the county use a concept called a pre-cultural on-site survey. And this is a meeting to introduce the project very early on to our Native tribal governments. And so the why, when, and how for doing this is that because these renewable projects would likely have federal requirements for formal consultation, we also realize, though, that there may be projects that don't have federal or state requirements for formal consultation with Native American tribes. So we developed an informal process. This would encourage early involvement with tribal nations that would then help to build relationships where we could share knowledge, experience, and exchange ideas on different projects back and forth. It's been shown that this early communication can avoid later challenges and unexpected delays. And so we've developed this as a suggestion for public hearing cases, not just for the renewable energy projects, but for overall as a public hearing cases that require conditional use permits. So just very briefly, this will supplement the required public participation plan required with all CUPs. And there's an outline of how to go about doing this. So to briefly talk about the schedule and the process going forward, We began this process in July of 2020. We've been working throughout with our advisory group. We have also been able and been fortunate to visit many of our large ranches, and particularly out at Perrin Wind Farm, we saw the turbines in operation. We've had study sessions and a retreat with Planning and Zoning Commission, work sessions with the Board of Supervisors. We are hoping to conduct public open house in the spring of 2022, and then also with a target date of public hearings and board action in the late spring of 2022 as well. So that concludes our introduction to Coconino County's renewable energy ordinance drafting process. We welcome questions, feedback, comments, or other ideas. Please contact me at mshaw@coconino.az.gov, and thank you very much.
Tammy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear. Yes, Melissa, I can hear you now. Okay, thank you for that presentation. Why don't we go ahead? I'm toggling. Give me one quick second here. I'm toggling between screens. Okay, so because now if I'm looking at if I'm understanding the agenda correctly, Melissa, we are on number 3, the discussion and questions portion, correct?
That's right. We did have some new information, but we can get back to that after your discussion and questions.
Okay, why don't we go ahead? So why don't you go ahead and give a bit of introduction there? And I believe, John, you indicated you had something to add. Why don't we go in that order? So why don't you go ahead and start?
Thank you very much. First of all, I offer what I'm going to say in some humility. I'm not an historian, so if I get anything wrong, and you know better, do jump in. I want to go into deep background, really because of some angst I felt mostly after we approved BREC, the Babbitt Ranches project, a couple of months ago. I'd like to start the deep background 150 years ago when European settlers of European descent showed up in northern Arizona and just saw eye-popping resources, huge trees, grass waist high. And they did what people do. They took advantage of it. There was a railroad coming through. There was a way to get the lumber out. They moved hundreds of thousands of cows into northern Arizona. And they cut down the trees and grazed off the grass. Sometime after the first part of the century, they found themselves looking around saying, okay, gee, back in Missouri, these trees would have sprouted from seeds because we left seed trees, and the grass would have grown back. What's going on? This ain't Missouri. And so they started, interestingly, the Forest Service started the Gus Pearson Research Center just north of town to try to figure out how to get seeds to grow. Part of what had happened also was fire suppression. Fire's inconvenient for us. And also with a lot less grass, there wasn't much fire happening. Interesting though, in 1919, there was a very wet spring, I guess a couple of wet years. There wasn't much grass on the ground, so seeds could get to the ground. They sprouted, and that was the beginning of the overgrown forest that we have today. Lack of fire, too many little trees. And now we've got millions of acres that we all understand the problem. We've got Fry approved, but we just can't figure out how to get the forest back to what it ought to be. That's very instructive to me. And I just, those folks, they weren't bad people. They didn't understand the science. They weren't as organized as we are. They didn't have Melissa to do long range planning. And here we are today. And I think my job as a commissioner is to not let that happen again, because we are now looking at eye-popping resources. I did some research and I couldn't reproduce it just a minute ago, but I think a square mile of solar is on the order of a couple of $100 million. And we're looking at potentially 10 or 20 square miles of solar, not to mention the wind. These numbers are huge. We're talking billions. The largest solar array on the planet that I could find was in China, and it was just about 17 square miles, which is what we're talking about here now. And I'm sure there'll be more. So I think my job as a planner is to use good science, which we didn't have 150 years ago. We don't have that excuse now. We know the science of this ecology very well, and be strong. In the BREC process a couple of months ago, I and we as a commission pretty much rolled over. And I was thinking to myself at the time, you know, this is Billy Cardasco's backyard. He's just presented to us that he's looking out 35 years and may just graze cattle on this land in 35 years. So he's going to make sure it's not ruined. But I believe the conditions that we approved would allow somebody to come in and blade a square mile of land, spray it with weed eater, weed killer, and turn it into a brownfield. I don't think there was any prohibition against that. I'm not sure. We also rolled over on the 6 inches under the fence because they were worried about critters chewing their wires, even though Don and I pointed out there's no force of nature that's going to keep rodents from getting into this place. So we are going to encounter applicants who are, I'm sure, wonderful people, but who are also bean counters. And they're going to push it back against anything that costs extra money. And I think my job is to look at the long term and make sure that at the end of a solar array, we are leaving a healthy ecosystem, and during, you know, both wind, solar, and battery, during the process, we're not disturbing, for instance, wildlife corridors or ecology, long-term ecology. We've got great examples. Thad Johnson lives off the grid out by Perrin Ranch, and he's been on our advisory group. He's come up with advantages of what they call Agro Voltaics, which is agriculture under solar arrays. In our case, that agriculture is probably just going to be grass because we don't have enough water to grow vegetables. But people are growing all kinds of stuff. They're grazing sheep and goats. They're harvesting vegetables and grains. There are a lot of interesting things going on, but the bottom line to me is not to allow anything that we do, not to do anything that can't be undone ecologically, and to make sure that ecological systems are intact. If you look at the maps that Melissa's got, you know, we're talking about a 15, 20 mile east-west swath of facilities. There's probably a lot of wildlife movement in that area. So we really have to, and I think everything I'm talking about is addressed in the ordinance. The trouble is we could have $1 billion project coming at us before the ordinance. So speaking for myself, I need to know the ordinance and be ready to put conditions in that are not yet by ordinance that speak to the spirit of the ordinance. I think we've worked really long and hard. I think Melissa's done a great job. I think we're headed in the right direction, but we're at an interesting time because a lot of these applications may be filed and before the ordinance is approved, and therefore the ordinance isn't official. So if anybody's got any corrections or additions to that, I'd love to hear it, but that's kind of where I am. We got to be strong. We definitely want renewable energy. It's not a bad thing to have $1 billion worth of assets to tax, but I think we want to not make the mistakes that our forefathers made. They could plead ignorance. We cannot. Thank you.
Hey, Saw, you know what? I was going to tell you one of the other things that we rolled over on, in addition to the ones you spoke of, was curtailment. We rolled over on that one as well. And I want to remind the commission on this, that was a question I asked, that if we find that there is going to be negative impacts to the bat, bird, avian species, could we curtail this? And you guys were at that meeting. You heard the response from the applicant that said, and that's not going to really work for us because then we're going to have trouble getting investors. So I completely understand SOT's concerns. I have the same ones. And what I would like to ask, this may be a question for our legal counsel. And here's my question. There is currently an ordinance that is underway, but if we have applications for projects that come in prior to this ordinance being adopted, can we apply the conditions that are out of the ordinance, even though it hasn't been adopted? Can we go ahead and already put those in for the conditions for the CUP?
Aaron?
Sorry, I was having some issues unmuting here. Yeah, I don't see any issues with, mainly with most of our CUPs, we're tailoring the conditions to meet the project and the surrounding circumstances. So I don't see why we wouldn't be able to start implementing that now and starting to work that in.
Okay, and that was really what I needed answered, because if we do get pushback from applicants, which is, you're kind of holding us to an ordinance that hasn't been adopted. What I'm doing here, Aaron, is I'm playing the devil's advocate, okay? If that argument came back, which is, well, come on, guys, you're holding us to an ordinance that hasn't even been adopted yet. That's not really cool. You're telling us that legally we can apply the conditions that are in the spirit of that ordinance before that is adopted.
I believe so. I'll oblige the commission. I'll do some more research into this, but I believe just the nature of it being a conditional use permit, we from time to time impose seeding, weed remediation requirements. And so I think that in the spirit, along the same lines as conditions that we imply like that, I believe we begin to apply those principles and standards stemming from this ordinance, especially given the fact that it's going to take such a long time to implement. Once it is put into full effect as an ordinance, it removes any questions about what we need to make conditional by putting it into law. But until then, I believe we can start to put this as a condition.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. I appreciate that. Okay, that's my question at this time. So I see other commissioners unmuted, so you guys go for it.
Tammy, since you mentioned that I had something to add to this at the beginning, along with SOT, I'd like to say that I concur completely with both your and SOT's point of view. And relative to that, I'd like to commend Melissa for her homework assignment on this. And that's one of the things I've been doing today. There is on the county website, the resources that Melissa sent to everyone. There is a research paper that was funded by the American Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, and it is on wind energy and wind park siting and zoning best practices and guidance for states. It is very thorough. It is rather detailed. And one thing I would like to let everyone know that there are a number of recommendations they have for considerations involved in the siting and zoning and the best practices for those. I went over that in as much detail as I could today. And I've got to tell you that what we are doing covers a lot more territory in how we address the siting and what is in the ordinance. It is a bit ahead of what was stated in the research paper. The research paper was done in 2012, so that you know how old it is. But nevertheless, everything that Melissa has presented in the YouTube presentation we just saw, it goes beyond the 8 points that they stressed in this research paper. I would suggest that everyone take a look at that. A lot of what they have to say in there is very pertinent to what we are going to be dealing with in the upcoming time before our ordinance is adopted, when we look at the conditions we have to set for siting of wind and solar. So I'm going to leave it at that and just suggest that everybody do their homework on this one. It's very worthwhile. We are ahead of the curve substantially right now. So I want to keep it that way, just like SOT does. Thanks.
If I could,
Thank you, John.
Tammy,
Yeah,
if I
and
could jump in for a sec.
You can.
Related to this is very, very interesting. Last couple of days, we've been interviewing candidates for Jess McNeely's position. And one of them, a Canadian, mentioned that in San Bernardino County, he had heard about abandoned solar sites that hadn't, where they hadn't made conditions that required people to remove the solar sites, so they're just sitting out there. So I looked up solar in San Bernardino County, and what I found was that there was a tremendous reaction against renewable energy sites there. And it looks now like San Bernardino County is not doing renewable energy. This is the only county larger than us in the country. And they're doing it on the basis that it's ugly and it's such a delicate desert environment that once you mess with it, you can't get it back. And that's exactly where I hope we don't go. I hope we go into a process, and I think we're way ahead of probably anyone in the country. I don't know, but anything I've seen, we go into a process where if photovoltaics disappears, or a particular site is just outdated, it goes away, and Billy Cardasco's out there grazing cows on a healthy landscape, and the pronghorn are moving through. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Well, and I agree with what my colleagues have said here. The one area that I'm really concerned about is the decommissioning of these projects, and as we've seen in the past on some projects, after they're developed, they're resold to somebody else, and we don't have any real security in place to make sure that they're decommissioned to the level that we specify. So I'd like to explore that a little bit on how we're going to deal with that, and to the best that we can, to be able to ensure that they're decommissioned properly.
Tammy, could I respond?
Yeah, actually, Melissa, I was going to ask you if you could address that on what we have, speak to the decommissioning.
And yeah, that's a great and really important question. We have drafted into the ordinance that two aspects: that we require a decommissioning plan, which describes exactly how they will remove all of the structures that were put on the site. And then two, to support that, we are asking for financial security. That would be based, and there's a detail in there, that is based on a professional engineer's estimate of the cost to remove the facility. So in other words, if the site was abandoned or if there was a financial shutdown where the county had to go in after the developer and actually do the abatement or remediation, the county would have that financial ability to do that. And it's in the form of usually a bond. So I don't know how much detail you wanted to get into, but I've started to have some conversations. I know we have taken bonds before for other types of projects, maybe not bonds that need to be in effect for 30 years, but it's something that I've started to have conversations with our financial departments about to see, you know, if there's anything else that we need to be aware of in putting that requirement into the ordinance. Because yeah, that's a really important point, is to how to protect the county going forward with these. Thanks.
Okay, Melissa, let me follow up on that, because you said that you are looking at the financial side of this to secure like the decommissioning and the restoration. Wouldn't you have to have that bond for the life of the facility?
Exactly.
Like you said, you didn't know if you needed to have it for 30 years, but these I believe wasn't the Breck, wasn't that a 30-year conditional use permit?
It is. You're exactly right. We would need to have the bonds that would be in place for the life of the project. So we would need to hold them for 30 or 35 years. Yeah, it's something that I don't know that the county has actually held security bonds for that long. So I'm just getting in more detail from our finance department about whether or not there's anything that we need to know about ahead of time. But it's written into the draft right now that that's required with the application.
Okay. So you're looking at the specifics of it, because I do want to just reiterate that it only makes sense to have the bond and the financial security equal to the length of the project. So I'm glad we're on the same page with that. Okay, thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
And that's toward the end of the draft, under the permits. Under the permits and an administration section at the very end. So
what page is that on, Melissa? I'm scrolling through it right now.
Okay. Yes, and it's probably on page 11.
Okay.
Of your copy. I'm looking at a different format. So it's section. It would be section 1.1F.
Okay.
B 11, decommissioning plan and securities.
Okay, 1.1F. Okay, that's page 7.
F.
Okay, 1.1F, and then tell me what the other.
Yeah, F2, B.
Okay.
And then under B, you would go down to section 10, decommissioning plan and securities.
Aha. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Melissa.
You're welcome.
Okay, and I'm reading that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Donnie, do you have any questions after reading that? I realize that this is just in draft form, but
we're headed in the right direction with this. The thing that was concerning me, and Melissa addressed this, is that over the life of a project, which is 30 to 40 years, you're going to have such inflation on that bond that's in place that it has to constantly be upgraded in order to cover those costs in the future. And there's ways of dealing with that. I've seen it written on industrial plants in different areas, and we can get there, but I'm glad you've jumped in on this, and thanks for doing that, Melissa.
You're welcome. And I guess if once we, if you had a chance to read that paragraph and have any other suggestions, we can talk later to make sure that that is as tight as it can be in terms of assuring that we've got that ability for the life of the project.
You bet, I'll work on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
We'll have,
yeah, because that's a good point, because if you do take in the cost in 30, 40 years, what it would be is going to be a whole lot different than what it is today. So that's a good point.
right. And we'll obviously get our legal staff to give their eyes on, put their eyes on this as well. I know Aaron already has, but we'll need to do it again.
Mhm.
And this is particularly relevant right now, just because as it was mentioned with thing about the decommissioning reports, just recently saw the decommissioning report come in for the Chevron Butte wind farm. So yeah, real world applications coming in right now on this. So I think maybe at a later time, maybe possibly in a few planning zoning commission meetings ahead, I might ask for some time to talk with the commissioners about that subject.
Mhm. No, Aaron, I think that would be a great idea, because as we move forward, when these applications come in, I think that based on the conversation that we're having today, I think now there are some highlights that all of the commissioners are going to be looking for. And I think that this is going to be one of them. What is the decommissioning plan? What is the financial security that's being out there? How is inflation being figured into this? Because we want to be sure that this is done properly. So definitely, Aaron, we would welcome that. Okay, so do any other, I'm going back up to the agenda, do any of the other commissioners have any questions on what was just presented, on what Saad and John presented to the commission? Any concerns, any thoughts? Okay, Melissa, I'm not seeing any takers on that. So if we look at the next item, it looks like that's item number 4, which would be next steps. What are you looking for there?
So we just wanted to talk a bit about, and this is where your feedback would be very valuable, to understand how the commission feels we are in the process. We would want to, at this point, have a follow-up meeting with the advisory group. They put so much time and effort, and they've been very dedicated to helping us work through the different details of the ordinance. So I think that, we'd like to put together a meeting with them pretty quickly and give them a briefing on the results of this session and your comments. But I guess it would be helpful to planning staff to understand whether or not there are any major questions, areas of concern, or how well you feel like you understand what we've presented so far. That would help us know how quickly we could move ahead, because we had the schedule up there in the video. We would hope to be able to conduct an open house. It may need to be virtual, but at least we could start putting it out to the community to introduce this draft, and then, bring comments back to you and then to the advisory group as well. Ideally, we could possibly move toward public hearings in the spring, but that really does depend on community feedback and also input from you all, as well as from the Board of Supervisors. I know that the Board of Supervisors is very interested in this. They've obviously had a lot of other priorities as well. So they've had introductions to this, not as detailed as what you've gotten into today, though. So feedback from you would be really helpful to us. The other piece I did want to mention, we have this week just kind of gotten a little bit more information on biomass plants. So I can get into that, next, but I did want to just brief you on what we've learned this week about biomass. But for now,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Melissa, I see, John, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, yes, and I was going to offer a comment relative to this. The research report that I mentioned to everyone, I think, is got one bit of it that is particularly of interest to everyone on the commission and staff as well. They have a rather good discussion about public opposition and what to expect, and an analysis of the type of objections that you may see. And they spend a good deal of the discussion on the relevance of what you may hear and what they have documented in zoning and citing in the past that you will hear, and how relevant it is to what we are actually doing with the ordinance when it comes to approval, conditions, and citing, and the reasons for doing what we're doing. So it's very, very relevant. I would suggest that everyone at least skim through that. NIMBY is not entirely accurate in describing what they discuss.
Okay. I know that as commissioners, I know that all of us may have, the soft spots in our heart, if you will, for, what we feel the impacts may be. For example, Donnie just put out his concern about making sure that there is a decommissioning plan with appropriate financial security. One of the ones that really caused me concern was the cumulative impacts. And have all of the commissioners read, Melissa, I'm actually looking at the written page 13. It's the one in front of me, and it's under current and proposed zoning code definitions. I would like to ask the other commissioners if they feel that this definition is sufficient. Has everyone else read it? The one that I have, Melissa, in front of me states, cumulative impact shall mean the total effects from any existing or foreseeable future utility scale renewable energy projects on fragmentation of wildlife movement areas or habitat. Has there been any talk about visual impacts, putting something about visual impacts in this cumulative impact definition? And how anyone else feels about that? And I guess one of the reasons that I'm bringing that up is at our last meeting when we were approving the Met Towers on the Babbitt Ranches again, and I actually asked where those were at relative to the project that we had the BREC project. And there's quite a bit in one area. And I was just wondering, Melissa, has that come up at all in the discussion in the advisory group? And how do any of the other commissioners feel about that?
I think that that is a relevant concern. When I read that, and of course, being on the committee, of course, I'm very familiar with that. I think that you could look at it and say, well, that is implied when we talk about this, but perhaps that's not enough. It may be necessary to add things such as visual impact, because implied is one thing, but stated in the text of the ordinance is quite another. And I think that would help in making it more specific rather than saying, well, that's what we meant to do. It's not worthwhile having arguments about what's implied or what the intent was when that section was written, I think.
Right. And John, I had shared this when Sat, Melissa, and Jessica and I met. And where I guess maybe one of my concerns is coming from is most of you know, I do like long road trips you know, I mean, literally, I cover thousands of miles every year in a car with friends and family. And my daughter and I'm just going to share what I share with Melissa Sott and Jessica. My daughter and I went to South Padre Island in Texas. And right across the bridge is Port Isabella. And when we were leaving, I saw it coming in, and then I saw it going out. And when you're leaving the Port Isabella area, there it is. I can't even describe to you the amount of turbines and the feeling, the look that it gives. And my daughter, well, I'll just tell you, she's 31. And so I wanted to know what she thought. I did not give my opinion. I just said, so what do you think about this? You know, what we're driving through? And she looked at me and she goes, this is awful. And I said, yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. And kind of like what Commissioner Best, when he started his remarks at the beginning, he said, as a commissioner, I want to make, basically, I'm kind of summarizing, but I want to be sure that I'm a good steward. And I don't want to see something like that happen. And that's the reason that I'm bringing it up, was because the really, really terrible visual impact that I saw, I thought, as long as I have any say, I will never let that happen in Coconino County. And that is the reason, there's kind of the genesis of why I'm talking about this. So, you know, Melissa, maybe this might be something that when the advisory group meets, perhaps maybe somebody else has driven through this area that I'm talking about and they've experienced the same thing. But I do think that visual impacts, especially in Coconino County, because we are in one of the most beautiful places in the world. You know, the Grand Canyon is one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. And I really am very concerned about visual impact. So I'm just throwing my concern out there. Maybe the advisory, maybe you feel it would be appropriate for the advisory group. I'm throwing it out there though, but it's a real concern that I have.
If I could respond to that, we spent probably more time on that than anything else in the advisory group. And I think if you look at what's happened so far in the county, I think we're doing okay. I think Perrins is okay. And I think Chevelon Butte is okay. It's definitely an impact, but it's not an impact where most people see it. I think what we got to in the committee was talking about what's the phrase, Melissa? Visible resources?
Visual resources.
Visual resources. And you know, we could spend another several years working on that issue alone. For one thing, we haven't had much input from the Native community. And so there are a dozen tribes around the county that consider the peaks sacred and other parts of the county sacred and may not want a wind tower between in that view shed. And so I think what we decided to do, and Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, we've put some conditions in there related to setbacks from visible resources, but we haven't carefully defined visible resources. And I think maybe that's a next step. You know, we can't do this for years and years and years. We need to move on, get this ordinance done, and then hopefully bring in the public and especially the tribal communities and tie down a little better what we mean by visible resources. Certainly, we don't want to discourage the tourist industry. That would be nuts.
If I could,
you know, that's our bread and butter. But that's my impression, that we've done some work on it, and you can read it in the ordinance.
Well, if I could
we're looking to the future. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
no,
ahead.
if I could just clarify a little bit, we do have a pretty specific definition for visual resource. And it particularly cites, as we were mentioning earlier, what we know are scenic byways, corridor roads. Those are actually defined visual resources that are in our comprehensive plan. What we don't have, and this is something, a bigger, one of those larger projects that we know would actually be really helpful, is if we conducted a visual resource inventory for the county, which would be bigger than just this visual resource definition. So I think that's just the small clarification there, that, you know, if we have, the Forest Service has a process, for instance, for identifying visual resources, because these are the ones that we know about. You know, for instance, a scenic corridor is something that is identified by ADOT, but there are lots of other visual resources that we just have not done an inventory for. But we know that that would be really useful. At the same time, that's a pretty big project that we didn't think we should delay this one for, if that makes sense.
Now, Melissa, I do understand, and like Scott said, we don't have years. We've got to get this, we need to get this on the move, okay? And I agree that some of the smaller details could take much longer. But I'm just going to reiterate that because I read this whole thing. I'm not kidding you, word for word. I mean the whole
Thank
draft.
you, Tammy.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm actually going to go. Let me just, before I go on to the other one, I just want to say, I want to reiterate my concerns and comments here. I believe that under cumulative impacts, I think it should say cumulative impacts shall mean the total effects from any existing or foreseeable future utility scale renewable energy projects on the fragmentation of wildlife movement areas, let's see, or habitat, comma, or visual resources. I'll just leave it there. You know, you want to comment, so I'm giving them to you. The other thing I wanted to ask you, on this cumulative impact definition, where it says cumulative impact shall mean the total effects from any existing or foreseeable future utility scale. Okay, so practically speaking, because we know what we have, we just approved BREC, okay? And we know we've heard the chatter of what is going to be coming. So is it appropriate when we're approving, when we have these other applications in front of us, is it appropriate to say, we're gonna make our decision and say, you know, there's going to be another foreseeable one coming up here, and we're going to go ahead and take that into account in our decision-making process at this time?
I think that would be appropriate. Aaron may have another piece to add to this, but as far as looking specifically at cumulative impacts and being real specific about wildlife corridors and visual impacts, you know, we could ask for those to be simulated, for instance, with a visual simulation in it, you know, addition to the project that you're looking with, as well as, you know, any known projects that were approved but not yet built. So, you know, it's not providing a crystal ball look, but it would be giving a best estimate as far as what we know at the time of that project and pulling all that together. So
okay. Actually, that wasn't really, I'm not sure if I'm asking the question like clearly. Okay, so I'm not asking approved but not built. I'm asking, you're asking us to look at this application that is in front of us, but we've already heard some pretty reliable chatter that a couple of other biggies are coming our way. And they're, I mean, in relative close proximity to one another. Can we consider the ones that we have heard might be coming?
I would be cautious of that. Just when there actually isn't something concrete in place, it just really is chatter. I'd be worried about any challenges to unfavorable decisions in the applicant side. being based on those decisions possibly being defined as arbitrary and capricious without something more concrete than just maybe industry talk.
Okay, so in this definition where it says effects from any existing or foreseeable future, what foreseeable future means, just to define that, would be approved but not yet built.
Well, or it could be where we have approved Met towers as well.
Okay, that's a good question, because that's actually why I asked at the last meeting. Okay, so these Met towers are going in here, which we know why they're putting Met towers in. If the information comes back feasible, one could reasonably assume that they're going to be going for a full-scale energy project. So Aaron, can we consider where the Met towers have been placed? Can we consider foreseeable future as Met towers?
I would say yes, because that's a hard data point that's in place. There's an application that's gone through, something that's been constructed, and possibly this might can earmark this. This might be a definition that might prove valuable just to retool slightly to define that. But I think it would be a very safe bet to say that we could take those projects into consideration. Like what Commissioner Walter was saying, there's a reason why the Met towers are there. It's not just talk. They're actually doing research into a possible installation.
Oh, okay, you know what? Maybe the best way I could have asked this question, I may have gone at it backwards. Could you define then, in this cumulative impact definition, shall mean the total effects from any existing or foreseeable future utility scale? Can you define for me what foreseeable future means and what we can consider with those words? What does that really mean?
I'll give you an opinion on that. Foreseeable. Okay, let's say you have Met tower sited in a particular area and the data gathered from those Met towers says, yes, this would be a good site. That's going to be something pretty concrete you can use in evaluating the next step, which would be a wind turbine farm.
But John, we don't get that information.
Well, we can always ask for it.
And then we're given the response of, we're sorry, that's proprietary.
Yeah, that's always a possibility, but you can always ask, well, have you found it to be feasible without revealing the exact data?
I wonder if
Okay, so John, practically speaking, then let's say that we were going to say, okay, we've got this application in front of us and it wants to go in this location, and we know that it is relative to the other projects that we have approved, we know that it's kind of there. How do we reach out to the Met tower people and say, we would like to know if the data that you have collected is feasible?
You very simply look at it and you say, if the data indicates to you as the applicant that this is a feasible site, then that would be enough to trigger a requirement that you look at all of the consequences of turning that site into a solar farm, a wind farm, whatever.
Okay, I'm still a little fuzzy. I'm still trying to get the figured in. Alan, I see you or Aaron, I'm sorry, I see you unmuted. What are your thoughts?
I'm just thinking over in terms of this definition that perhaps it is better to have it as Melissa's drafted it now, because it does leave room for essentially for the commission to make findings at the moment based on the circumstances of what the commission at the time finds to be reasonably foreseeable. If it is yeah, data that is procured from other companies that are doing research with their Met towers. If there's some other criterion that comes up that becomes useful, it does make it at least, with it being fuzzy, it does allow room to use more methods. But again, with it being open like that, it does allow at least some room for attack if somebody's not particularly happy with the result. But it would essentially require whatever county agency or fact finder is making determinations to specifically state findings citing to why something would be reasonably foreseeable, and then just let people argue out the facts afterwards.
I'd have to concur with what our council just stated. I've been in these kinds of discussions before on defense contracts, and you've got to have something to base the decision on. Like our findings have to be based on fact. And
Exactly.
we're simply asking for support. You may find out later that the facts that we've been given were not correct, which happens sometimes. But nevertheless, I'd like to have some assurance that the findings that I make as a commissioner are based on some foundation of fact. What that is could come up during a pre-app meeting or at the commission hearing on a CUP. But we've got to have something, and I think I stated this rather well.
Okay. I just wanted, it was discussion time. And so, Melissa, you wanted to know thoughts. So I'm throwing that out there. You've heard the conversation, so I'm going to toss it to you now. Okay. That was really, I am going to go, let me just make sure. I think that's it, Melissa. So I'm going to let the other, okay, wait, one more. I've got one more. Okay. And this is going back. Okay. So I am now on page 4. I'm on section 1.1E, the performance standards. I am on number 5, where we're talking about fencing. And the last paragraph, or excuse me, pretty much the last one, security fencing shall be permeable to small animals by leaving a 6-inch gap between the bottom of the fence and the ground, exclusive of substation facilities. So I would think that going forward, when we have another application, if we've got this, that when they say, well, we'd like to fence the whole thing off, we can go back and say, well, we're going to hold you at 6 inches.
I agree with that. Like I said before, we're going to get pushback. Anything that costs money or is inconvenient, we're going to get pushback on, and somebody's going to say, okay, I'm going to not do this $200 million project. And we're just citizens. Those numbers are, I don't usually write too many $200 million checks myself. So it's a little daunting, but I think that's the role we're in. And I think we have to be strong, set our standards. And honestly, I think what we're doing is industry leading. And I think there will be other jurisdictions modeling off of the work that Melissa's putting together right now. I also wanted to interject that from now on, usually somebody says as they approve the Met towers, but this does not necessarily mean that I am going to approve a wind farm at this location. And I will definitely say those words now, because
I did it the last one. I said, don't assume there is any implied, tacit approval here. Yeah.
Now we do have a comprehensive plan in the works over the next few years. We do have some opportunities there to look at large scale planning. I can't remember if it was forwarded to this group or just to the advisory group, but Game and Fish has a large scale wildlife corridor map that includes Coconino County. Haven't talked to them much about it, haven't heard testimony about it, but it's on the books. So that could help us. We also have the concept of conservation land systems that I think I've mentioned before. You can, if you Google conservation land system, Pima County, you'll see a wonderful story about what they did down there. It's a big job. It takes a lot of money. But if billions of dollars are coming our way, maybe we can use some of that tax money to have a conservation land system where, you basically lay out the use of land to make sure that you're maintaining plant and animal ecosystems. And so there are long-term things we can do. In the short term, I think we just, I think we got a great document in front of us with some tweaking, and I think we just all have to be on board with it until it's actually an ordinance. We have to all understand it, and it's up to staff to write these conditions. So, my message to staff is start writing conditions off of this document right now. It doesn't have to be an ordinance for them to use it to write conditions off of.
Right. And, I thought that was my last question, but I promise you all that this next one really is my last comment. Okay. Melissa, I am looking at section 1.1F, okay, permits and administration. And I am looking at 3A. And it says modification of facility maintenance and operation may be required based upon impacts identified by monitoring reports, such as takings of listed species or an unanticipated mortality rate of birds or bats. The methodology of monitoring and compliance reporting shall be as determined by the director. Here's my question. Is the director the best person for this job?
Well, that's a great question. When we put this together, and this was a pretty important topic of discussion with the advisory group, because the director would base that monitoring methodology on the expert reports that we would receive with the application. And so, for instance, I know that with Perrin Wind Farm, and what we've written into the draft is that we would require, for instance, a wildlife protection plan. And that's going to set out how these sites are monitored and how that reporting increment comes together. The piece as determined by the director, that's a good question. And that may actually be a phrase that we want to take a harder look at.
Okay, because what I was thinking when I read that, I think you believe me, I read every word of this now.
I do believe you, thank you.
Yeah, what I was wondering was if there was an agency, let's say Game and Fish, Wildlife. I'm just wondering, I'm going to throw that out there and just say, is the director the best person for this job? Okay, and I am now done with all of my comments and questions. So I'm going to be quiet for a while and let somebody else talk.
If I could just jump in on the director question.
Yes.
What the way I pictured that happening is not that the director all by themselves would make a decision on that, but yeah, like Melissa was kind of alluding to, there'd be probably a lot of people involved who we would seek out their opinion, me and Game and Fish, but also anybody else who we could talk to just to gather the most information we could. And so the way I read that was just naming the director as sort of more meaning like these would be determined on a case-by-case basis, because the methodology for these surveys and stuff changes all the time. So the way I read that is just that leaves it open in the future so that we can just use the best available science. And that just sort of names a place where the buck stops. And so basically that it would be decided by CD, if that helps.
Well, I understand. No, I absolutely understand how we got here. But I'm still going to leave the question. I'm still going to leave that question lingering. Is the director the best person for this job? Like I totally understand, Jessica, what you said. I completely understand that. I'm just saying, when I was reading it, it kind of popped to me, and I'm just like, I don't know if that's the best person. I understand how you got here. I'm just going to let the question linger. But thank you for that. Thank you for the explanation.
On the Breck project, what we said, condition 17, beginning on the 15th of January, there'd be an annual status reports documenting post-construction and operational impacts, wildlife, noxious weed control, cultural resources, the things we're talking about. So we said there'd be an annual, and it and then it said the director may increase the time between reports not to exceed 5 years. And I think at the time we were thinking, I was thinking anyway, you know, when things crank up, we want to be looking every year, but after it's been there for a while, it's reasonable to think that we could have reports spaced out a little farther, not to exceed 5 years.
And I agree. And Saad, if I recollect correctly, before we modified that, there was a point where it could have fallen off altogether.
Exactly.
If the director
Exactly.
would have so chosen it to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was one that we did do right. I think that was a condition that we did get right on that one. I'm just going to put it out there. Those were just my thoughts, and I don't have any more. So
kind of in the same vein, on page 11, required modifications to the facility. And we got a little pushback on this from industry, I think, in the on the committee. And it says that changes to wind turbine operations shall be limited to the minimum time necessary to mitigate the impact. And this would be if there were bird or bat takings, not to affect more than 0.05% of the total annual wind facility hours. 0.05% is 4 hours a year.
Yeah.
And that seems, now that's 4 hours per year per turbine. So if you had 50 turbines and you had to shut down 1 or 2 because of bats, you could use more hours on those. But it seems very small. And I'll just leave it at that. 0.05%, that's 0.0005
right.
of the number of hours.
Because we have been together about 50% of that time. Just with this meeting, we've been together almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
And that's in one afternoon, and 4 hours is over a whole year. So I do get the concern.
And Tammy, so if I could just clarify, then that was, as Sat mentioned, per turbine. So for instance, with Heron Ranch, the total listed in that, and Jessica can chime in, the avian and bat protection plan was 120 hours was the not to exceed limit based on that number of wind turbines. So we just used that percentage here.
Okay. Okay.
I'd like to just add here, there's been a lot of good discussion on here about things that we've had concerns about and things that we've worried about since we approved the last one. What we also have to keep in mind is we don't want to push the landowners or the ranchers into having to sell their property. We want to make some path for success for them to be able to have some additional income that works for everybody. It's a win-win situation. And that's really how I see it, is to make this a win-win, but not end up with a ruined piece of ground afterwards.
Yeah, ruined landscapes, ruined wildlife, ruined vegetation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I do too.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd also agree with that. I think that we spend a pretty good bit of time looking at the compromises that can be made, such as the flexibility the commission may have in making decisions that would affect that. Again, the report I referenced, that was another point that they made, although it wasn't necessarily in reference to the conditions that we have in Arizona and throughout the Western United States relative to this. But nevertheless, they did address that. The compromises necessary to make it work for both sides of the equation.
No, and I agree. Yeah. I think that's a really important, I think that really is the crux of this whole thing, is finding the right balance for everybody involved and all of the factors involved.
I was part of the tour out at Perrin Wind Farm, a month ago, and I think that it looks good out there. And I got to say that Mike McCauley looks like a pretty happy camper. So
yeah,
he has a couple of hundred cows out on that 20,000 acres and a few thousand sheep. And I think what he's really hurting is wind towers, and doing okay. So, and the land looks pretty good.
Yeah, we have some excellent landowners, and you had mentioned Billy Cordasco, Michael McCauley. Those are excellent landowners that are going to do a good job, and that's with nobody telling them to do a good job. So this really is just, it's an important ordinance, and so I'm really glad that we've had this conversation. So Melissa, you wanted input and feedback and comments. So
yeah, thank you.
There's some of that. Yeah. John, you're unmuted.
I'd like to add one thing to that. One thing that I thought that Mike McCauley did, at least in my point of view, is a terrific bit of insight into the kind of things that he and other ranchers are looking at throughout the state, and something that I think that we should be looking at when we make some of our decisions, and that is the natural resource conservation districts in Arizona. He gave us a copy of their 2019 conservation report, and that is some really, really worthwhile reading in my book. This is a result of a program that was started during the Roosevelt administration, and it is still going.
And
John, was there like one thing that stood out to you in this report that Mike McCauley may have brought up that is relevant to this conversation?
I wouldn't say it's any one thing. The fact of the matter is that a lot of this, I think I already am pretty well aware of, but it just gives you one more thing that you need to look at in decision making, and it addresses a lot of the things that Sat has brought up, and that I concur with him is extremely important. And just what are the impacts of what you do with the land? I think that identifying a standout, I guess that would have to be the consideration. Because as this country becomes more urbanized, I think people forget that there are still a lot of people out there like the Mike McCauleys and others throughout this state and in this county, that their points of view and what they're actually doing with the land is very important.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I agree. I agree, John. Yeah. Okay, does anyone else have anything? Melissa, going back to the agenda, does that conclude item 4, which is next steps, or did you have any more before we adjourn?
That was pretty much it. Just wondering what the commission would think if we start to move toward open houses. to get more public input to start to put this draft out into the field, so to speak.
Well, I know the supervisors want it to move forward. Can anyone make a good argument, any of the other commissioners, why we wouldn't start moving forward in that direction? Because I can't see one.
Here's a question for you. We have a document from Arizona Game and Fish showing large scale wildlife movement. Have they had a chance to look at the maps that you have, Melissa, showing proposed facilities? Are we in sync with them? I think it's important that if they've got that information out there and we're moving forward with something that goes 15, 20 miles east-west across a huge piece of real estate, that we ought to be talking the same language, or we're going to have conflicts. And the quicker we resolve conflicts, the better. Before applicants spend a lot of money analyzing things, maybe we should just hand that map out if Game and Fish stands behind it.
Jessica, you're unmuted. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jessica, I'm sure will chime in. I just wanted to mention, so the map I think that Sod is referring to is kind of our big project map. So we have, it's a draft, but we've taken all of the projects that we know about, including Met Towers, and put them on one map. So is that what you're referring to, Sod?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so that kind of gets back to, the conversation about understanding cumulative impacts and projects in the foreseeable future, because we are trying to track that as best we can based on pre-application meetings as well as applications. But yeah, Jessica, go ahead from there, please.
No, we haven't sat down with Game and Fish and that specific map, but they do look at each project as it comes up, and they would look at what's on the ground as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, yes and no. And in
share the map.
in a perfect world, we'd be out in front, and that's what a conservation land system is. You're getting out in front and not doing it piecemeal. If you do project by project by project, you can wake up one day and say, oh my gosh, look what I've done. If you're out in front with landscape scale maps, you don't get to that, oh my gosh. So that's why I'm asking that question. I'd like it, if we're going to go to the public with this and the public says, hey, you're covering the whole landscape east to west, how are the antelope going to get through? How are the wolves going to get through when they're allowed to go north of Route 40? It just might, if we have that map and we're going to use it, we might want to just sit down with them and do some talking.
Yeah.
And I know we're kind of not there. We don't really have a vehicle for that kind of analysis yet. We're more project by project, and that's, we've done okay so far, I think, but we're looking at such a big landscape scale challenge ahead of us that I'm just throwing it out there. What is there anything we should do? I don't know.
So I think we can, and I don't have the map up here, but I think the map does give us a pretty good indication of existing, approved, but not built, and then at least applications that we've seen through pre-application meetings.
Yeah.
It gives us some sense of what that may end up looking like. So I know working on the map has been a bit of a challenge because just the, I don't need to get into all the details, but parcel numbers don't really accurately reflect the footprint of the project. But I think we can continue to try to work on this map because it is a good visual as far as the projects in the county.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think we're doing applicants a favor if we can get out in front. We don't want people coming in here
Yeah.
And, you know, theoretically, we have this ordinance, or we're working on it, you know, a lot of them are involved with it. And then suddenly we spring a map from Game and Fish and say, oh, by the way, independent of everything you've heard of, you can't put photovoltaics on this whole swath of land because that's where antelope have to go through. You know, we've got to, the more out front we can get to accommodate, to get the information to applicants, so they're not just spinning their wheels, the better off we are. And I know it's hard to do, but if Game and Fish has got a map, that's a big step in that direction. I'll be
Okay, so
quiet now
Melissa,
because my dogs are barking. So
Okay, no, I get it. Melissa, did you get
Yeah.
that too?
Yeah. Thank you for
Okay.
that. And so we have been thinking about updating our map, and we do have information from Game and Fish that we have been wanting to overlay on that. There's a lot to it, so, but it's something we can look at, and we've got some other ideas about how to make a more interactive map system that would, I think, be informative to decision makers as well as developers. So we just need to put that together. But I mean, this has been really good input from everybody, and I think that you know, moving forward, we would certainly keep you as a commission up to date, but our next steps would also include, as I mentioned, getting back with the advisory group, going over some of the details, getting their feedback as usual, and then developing our open house format.
Okay.
And, you know, obviously getting feedback from the supervisors about how much they would like to learn about this before they get it at a public hearing, because there's a lot to it. And that's why this has been very valuable for us, because we wanted to make sure that as best possible, we could, you know, provide a good background as to what this draft contains. And I will send out the still presentation to you as well, so you can have that to look at. Yeah, we're always here to answer any questions, or, you know, to follow up where you think we need to.
Okay.
I have one more thing. I have this phrase in my head that's bouncing around: landforms. Landforms are what we look at. You know, that's what people come from around the world to look at. They are in the way sometimes of big landscape scale projects, and they are also related to wildlife movement. Maybe we could have a little landform analysis to see if there are some things, you know, the maps that you showed us were squares and group squares of squares without consideration of what the land actually looks like out there. Maybe in the way that we are looking at visual resources, we could also look at landforms in the sense that here is a canyon, it is a wildlife corridor, it is beautiful, it's in the way. Let's just carve this out right now. We don't want development in this canyon, and we don't want it developing within a half a mile of it so the birds can fly in and out of it. That might help us get to where we want to be. Trying to bring all this together and not surprising applicants down the road. So just a comment. Thanks.
That would be a great resource to have. I'm not sure what it would, it might take a while to put something like that together, because that's more the conservation land system that you referred to earlier. You know, and just that said, we would be asking with each application for those to be identified on a project by project basis, understanding that there are much obviously broader and larger resources. So that would be something that would be wonderful to have as a resource. We'd have to spend some time with our GIS department developing that.
You know, it could be if you got with Game and Fish some things would jump out at you. You could find that map includes some canyons or valleys or whatever, and it's already kind of done through Game and Fish. So that's a possibility too.
Melissa, just a suggestion. If you take a look at the parcel map, you can also pull up one of the layers as a topographical map on top of that, which would be very useful if you're used to reading a topo map. That will give you a pretty good idea of land forms just from a mapping standpoint.
Thank you.
Okay, Melissa, I think we've had some great input today, some great conversation.
Yeah,
So
thanks.
is there, yeah, what any last, questions from you, and Jessica, for you as well? Do you have anything you want to add or comment on?
I don't have anything right now. That we've had some really good questions brought up that we haven't been resolved, and I'm really happy to look into things and discuss some more with you guys. This has been a really good discussion.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. Melissa, anything else before we adjourn?
No, like I said, and yeah, thank you again for your time. I think it's been very useful for us, and I hope useful for you all as well. So, and because we did record this session, it will be available. I think Marty will be putting together minutes as well. So we'll have that documentation.
Okay. Okay, that will be great. And I just want to say, I really appreciate all of the commissioners. I appreciate everyone being on here. And I really appreciate the commissioner setting time aside to be here today as we prepare for some stuff coming our way. Thank you. And Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all.
Yeah.
And I think,
Merry Christmas.
Yeah. And I think with that, we're going to adjourn unless anyone's got anything else.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry
Yeah,
Christmas.
have a great new year, and let's hope we have a even better year next year.
There you go.
Yeah,
Bye,
Merry
guys.
Christmas to
Bye-bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.